In today's video, I'm going to give y'all 6 of my BT10 deck lists that I plan on testing in this brand new format. Let's get started. Alrighty, and the first deck I have for you guys is the new and improved Jesmon. Not only did Jesmon get a brand new starter deck that unleashed a awesome boss monster that can clear security, blitz, and summon Sistermons, but we also got some really awesome inclusions from BT10 in the form of Genkumon X-Antibody, Jesmon X-Antibody, and I think the coolest card in this deck, Jesmon GX. This card not only has a really cool Wind Digivolving effect to let you reuse other Wind Digivolving effects, but during both players' turns, it can gain piercing, blocker, and plus security attack. If you guys have never seen a Jesmon deck before, the idea is basically to be a pseudo toolbox deck that can superior summon or superior play all of these really powerful Sistermon cards that all have their own unique effects to help build your board and set up plays to go for game. The most powerful one, bar none, is the brand new Sistermon Seal, which has a really powerful effect that lets you climb up into your evolution chains much faster and can sometimes be done in the middle of attacks. On top of that, Bandai finally decided to fix the no good level 5s problem by giving us a brand new Savior Huckmon in the starter deck, which effectively makes playing Judgment of the Blade no longer necessary. And I'm sure some of this stuff is actually really standard to anyone out there who knows anything about Jesmon, but one thing that might be a bit of a shock is the inclusion of Genkumon X-Antibody. This is a tech that I kind of pseudo stole from Izzy and the rest of the Royal Knights crew. They were a team of Digimon players and they recently built a Jesmon deck with the help of Izzy that included this card, and I really loved the role it served in the deck. Basically, the way Jesmon wins most of its games isn't by actually blowing out your opponent's security with a single stack. It's actually by using a bunch of little attacks from your Sistermons that can clear off your opponent's final securities. And having a card like Genkumon X-Antibody that not only has blocker, but can become a really big blocker during your opponent's turn and make it possible for all of your Digimon to gain extra DP and be pseudo invulnerable to things like where Garurumon bounces or various other tucking or bouncing effects is really strong. The ideal defensive board state for this deck is this card, the brand new Sistermon Blanc from the starter deck that can gain Decoy, and Solarmon if you're fighting against a matchup that reduces play costs like Crossheart. Also, if you haven't noticed, we are playing one copy of Death Xmon. This is going to be a trend. So yeah, that's my current deck. The only thing I could really see myself changing are some of the Sistermon counts, like playing more copies of the Decoy Blanc, and maybe some of the rookie counts, like playing more copies of this Huckmon to gain even more memory when you're summoning sisters. Otherwise, this deck is really consistent, really cool, and I actually think really well placed in the meta so far, at least until we get EX3 in a couple of weeks. Up next, I have for you guys the blue deck I plan on testing in this format, Blue Flare. Now, I'm on record for saying that I think the better blue deck in BT10 is actually Metal Garurumon X-Antibody, and I still have that opinion. But that being said, this video is not about giving y'all the best decks that I plan on playing, the ones I already have figured out. It's about showing you the ones that I'm testing in BT10, and Blue Flare is definitely one that I love playing. It's basically like a Digicross deck that tries to hard summon really powerful Digimon for cheaper, like Metal Greymon being played for 3 instead of 7, and then using all the powerful on-play effects. But it has a really weird advantage engine in that it wants to constantly be drawing cards to find all the intricate combo pieces it wants, and it doesn't really have any big blowout plays besides Metal Greymon into Decker Greymon with the regular Greymon starter deck and the Blue Flare Greymon underneath. The way it would work is you would hard play this, have at least this Greymon underneath, and then when you evolve into Decker Greymon, place the Blue Flare Greymon underneath. If your opponent has 2 or more dudes in play, you can attack twice with Rush and plus security attack. And this version, I guess you can say, of Blue Flare, the one that plays Jellymon and the Startling Thunder package to help you deal with level 4s and Tamer cards sometimes, is a version that I saw doing really well at the Latin America DC1 Grand Prix. I thought it was interesting, I made some changes, and now I'm playing it. The idea is that Jellymon has actually a lot of synergy with what this deck wants to do, playing Tamers and drawing cards, and at the same time giving us access to Startling Thunder as a way to bounce back opposing Tamer cards in a blue deck. Having this kind of control against a Crossheart deck, for example, or even a Blue Flare mirror match could be really cool. And with the powerful memory gain effects we have in this deck, like Blaze, Memory Boost, and Kyria, we can actually choke our opponent at 1 with the use of Startling Thunder, and so it can be a really useful tool for just slowing down the game and giving us those extra turns of advantage we need. Speaking of advantage, my personal favorite combo in this deck is Gaussmon on deletion effect, summon Dredgermon from hand, and draw at least 2 cards. The one sort of like bad thing about Blue Flare that I've personally been noticing when playing this deck isn't that like the deck isn't good, it's just that it is so reliant on drawing multiple copies of Metal Greymon that it can become stressful sometimes to maintain these cards in hand. If any are in security, you have to sometimes make sure you have Kyria in play and then hard play something like Greymon or Male Birdramon so that way you can get it back. And hard playing level 4s doesn't always feel the best unless you have ways to sort of mitigate that, like the Crossheart deck does in the form of Zenjiro. But overall, I do like this deck. I think Crossheart's a really cool mechanic, finally giving us a use for all these excess cards we have in our hand when it comes to being a Digimon player. And yeah, Blue Flare is one of those decks that just does it really well. At this point in the video, you've been watching for a couple of minutes, so I think it's about time that I ask you guys to make sure you leave a like on this video if you're enjoying it, and subscribe if you want to see more videos like in the future. Also, comment down below what deck you are currently testing in BT10. And if you ever want to see me using decks like this or others in person, be sure to follow me over on Twitch. Link is down below as always. All right, let's talk about the green deck I'm playing in BT10. Grandis Kuwagamon. Yes, I know, Bloom Lordmon is the cool newcomer to the green color in BT10, but personally, I don't want to test Bloom Lordmon until we get the new plant and vegetation support in EX3. I'd rather revisit something like Grandis Kuwagamon, a known strategy that got a consistency boost in the form of the brand new Kokuamon. And while a lot of y'all watching might be tired of playing Grandis, playing against Grandis, or seeing Grandis, I for one never played it during BT10 and would love to give it a shot now that it has some new tools to work with. Also, I kind of didn't mention this at the beginning of the video, but a lot of these decks that I'm showing you are kind of geared for what I think the expected meta is going to be for the early BT10 format, which is a lot of Alphamon, a lot of Jesmon, and a lot of Crossheart. And this deck does pretty good against at least 2 of those. Now, in case you've never seen a Grandis deck before, the main idea is combining a Kuamon promo with a Kuamon X to gain extra resources to enable you to go into Grand Kuwagamon and then Grandis Kuwagamon in a single turn. Once you do that, you're able to attack multiple times with multiple plus security checks thanks to the promo Grand Kuwagamon's Digiburst effect. And sure, that's the main way people try to play and win with this deck, but personally, I've never really thought of Grandis as the best OTK deck. I did think of it as one of the best control decks in the format because every single turn at the end of attack, if you have Grand Kuwagamon, you can suspend and then unsuspend. So it's really possible to just like clear out your opponent's board in a single turn when properly using this deck. And so if I ever find myself playing with this deck and not having access to the full combo, I will still evolve up into a Grand Kuwagamon and then a Grandis just so I can gain board presence against my opponent. And then eventually I'll grind them out of the win because I can just constantly clear all their bodies while they cannot clear mine. So yeah, in my opinion, even though Grandis has that really powerful OTK button, it's got a lot of other options afforded to it, especially given some new tools we have, like the brand new Floodgate in Pomumon. This card is actually crazy given the meta landscape that I see moving forward for Digimon, which is a lot of Crossheart and a lot of Jesmon. Being able to turn off the Akari and the Zenjiros from summoning Digimon, as well as Jesmons from summoning Sistermons period, seems really strong, especially when you take into account, again, the control ability of this deck. On top of that, the inclusion of the brand new Kokuamon finally gives us access to the on-Digivolve part of the Kokuamon X-Anitbody, which decks like Metal Garurumon and War Greymon X-Anitbody have had for a while. And I would say the one neat thing that I'm doing is this deck is kind of straying away from the Death Xmon route and going for a one-of Omnimon Merciful mode instead, because it's one of the few OTK decks that actually properly uses the 2 level 6 evolution line, which lets merciful modes on Digivolve effect become a lot stronger. And I don't know, being able to guarantee trash security and then next turn attack twice just feels really consistent at ending games when you do have to play a little bit slower as Grandis. But if you want to take out Merciful Mode for a copy of Death Xmon, I wouldn't blame you. So yeah, that's my current green deck that I'm testing in BT10. Once EX3 comes out, I'm definitely switching to Bloom Lordmon because those cards look incredible. And now that we got this green goober out of the way, let's move on to an actual new deck, but a similar strategy that we've seen, Minervamon Loop. Yes, everyone, this is the purple talk of the town, the natural successor of the classic Lilith Loop we saw in BT5. We now have Minervamon Loop, which focuses around the interaction Minervamon has with the Cerberusmon Werewolf Mode Cerberusmon package and the BT5 option card Revive from the Darkness. Basically, if y'all have never seen this combo before, Minervamon has a really cool on deletion effect that lets you summon a level 5 from your trash when she gets deleted. So the idea is you have a rested Minervamon that probably attacked already, you activate Revive from the Darkness, you delete her to summon Cerberusmon from your trash, and then you use Minervamon's on deletion effect to summon Werewolf Mode from your trash, and that will effectively net you +5 memory because you spent 4 with Revive, and then you gained 9 off of Cerberusmon Werewolf's effect to on-play delete a Cerberusmon and gain 9 memory. Oh, and this guy has Rush, so doing all this gains you 5 memory and a Rush attacking ultimate that you could use to evolve into another Minervamon and do it all over again. It's really cool. Calling it a loop kinda doesn't make sense because there's no way inherently through the Minervamon package to actually recycle cards like Revive from the Darkness, but if you have multiple, you can use multiple. And yeah, that's pretty much it. Like I said, this deck takes a lot of inspiration from classic Lilith Loop, playing high amounts of floodgates like Gazimon and Psychomon to help you combat the meta and have a bit more of a toolbox control-y feel. We're still playing the 1-of copy of Mass Day and the 1-of copy of Gintakumon Promote, so we can have a really powerful late game push to guarantee damage. And then there's just some really cool tech cards in here like Lucamon Chaos Mode, Deathclaw as another way to kind of delete your opponent's Digimon as well as delete your own, so that way you can get through floodgates like memory blockers, etc. Also, it's a really powerful card to check in security against specifically Crossheart, as well as things like Jack Ray, just to skip your opponent's turn. One thing I do want to point out is that we are playing a lot of 1-drop blockers in this deck because Minervamon also gives us the handy ability to summon blockers or other Digimon during our opponent's turn when they hard play stuff. So as long as you have like a couple of blockers in your trash, you can effectively, whenever your opponent hard plays like a Rush Digimon or something, have an instant check to it in terms of your defense. And in terms of matchups, this deck looks really interesting. It has a lot of interesting interactions against things like Jesmon or anything that superior calls / plays cards for really cheap. I'd say the only real bad one you have is Crossheart and maybe some of the OTK matchups like Alphamon or Metal Garurumon X-Anitbody because of how fast they are. This deck, while not slow, does require a lot of pieces, and for you to get a lot of value out of it, needs to have them in multiples. But overall, the deck is really cool, and I recommend you try it if you're a fan of the purple playstyle. Rounding off our Blast from the Past section, we have Alphamon, the king of the X-Antibodies, is still king in BT10, unless they limit Doro Greymon, in which case this deck is unplayable. But because we're playing in English, that is neither here nor there. Let's go ahead and break down what's changed. I now play a copy of Chikurimon in this deck from the brand new Ragnarlordmon starter. That's it. That's honestly the only real difference in this deck from its classic BT9 iterations. We still have the 4 copies of Cool Boy, we still have the 3/3/3 Alpha Oryukin Oryumon, and we are still playing things like Breath of the Gods, Kongo, and even X-Antibody as fun tech cards to up our defense, up our invulnerability, and maybe even up our resource curve. Something that I've been doing since the end of BT9 is sticking with playing Kota Demoto in this deck, and it's an absolute powerhouse of a card. Dropping this feels so good within the first couple of turns of any game I play, so definitely lean into playing Kota in your Alphamon decks if you haven't already. And if you guys have never seen an Alphamon deck before, the main boss monster is Alphamon Oryukin, who in combination with things like Alphamon and Oryumon allows you to multi-attack, delete all of your opponent's highest DP Digimon, and take an extra turn essentially by getting rid of your X-Anitbody sources to gain memory when your turn ends. This deck is super consistent, super powerful, and can just win the game out of nowhere like a lot of classic BT9 decks, and in BT10, unless we get the Doro Greymon restriction, it is not going anywhere. Speaking of decks that aren't going anywhere, and speaking of potential ban and restricted list changes, let's talk about the last deck I have for you. Crossheart. You guys thought I wasn't going to talk about Crossheart in this video. You are crazy. Of course, I'm going to talk about what is looking to be the most popular deck in the BT10 format, but I will also add to that it doesn't actually look like it's going to be the strongest deck in the BT10 format. Let me explain. First things first though, if you have never seen this deck before, it's essentially the poster child for the Digicross mechanic. You have all these members of the Crossheart crew alongside Darulamon here that can be Digicrossed or Digifused into Shoutmon X4 and X5 respectively. X4 is the main resource engine of the deck and usually the first one you go into to establish some early board presence, and due to its end of attack effect to let you recycle your save cards back underneath your tamers like Taiki Kudo, you can actually go into multiple Digicrosses for really cheap, multiple times per turn, and usually the one you want to end on is Shoutmon X5. He's got plus security attack, blocker, and he's just a really powerful card, especially when you give him things like Reboot thanks to the Sparrowmon inheritable. In terms of the actual pieces of the Crossheart crew, in order from best to worst, it goes Shoutmon, Starmons, Sparrowmon, Ballistamon, and then Darulamon. Honestly, because all of your big Shoutmons have material save X, you kind of don't care if they get deleted. Most of the time you're deleting them with their own effects anyway. And if that wasn't good enough, all these cards having really powerful inheritables that makes these guys rush piercers that can draw cards, they also all have the save mechanic, which basically plays into the resource engine of this deck because, you know, classically decks that require a lot of different named cards in order to achieve a powerful boss monster aren't usually that good because you're essentially using 4 cards to summon 1 and get maybe 2 back. If you lose all those cards, those are resources you're not going to get back. Well, thanks to the save and material save mechanic, we can actually keep them around underneath our tamer cards, and thanks to cards like Kyria and Taiki Kudo, we can use the sources that are being saved as the actual material we need to Digicross. So let's say I have Shoutmon X4 here, I attack while he has 3 sources underneath him and he dies. I can material save 2 of them and place them back underneath a Taiki Kudo that I can use on the following turn. A key thing to note here too is that Taiki Kudo lets you play from all of your different tamers. So things like Akari and Zenjiro or even Tai Kamiya, if they have sources underneath them that can be used for a Digicross, you can use them with Taiki. Taiki is basically your main searcher of the deck. He also lets you accelerate multiple pieces for Digicross combo. Akari straight up lets you play a Darulamon and draw a card every time you hard play a Crossheart, and then Zenjiro lets you play Ballistamon, and then you gain a memory each time you play a Crossheart. So if you go into a Shout 5 while you have Zenjiro, you're gaining 1 memory. If you're doing it with Shout 4, you're paying him for 0. If you have multiples, they all stack. These kids and these powerful save mechanic Digimon essentially create the most stable resource engine I've ever seen in Digimon. I mean, classically, this deck feels like a rush deck, but if the game goes like 10 plus turns, it's going to have more cards available to it and more memory available to it than any other deck in the format. And if y'all have been wondering why I've been playing 2 copies of Death Xmon in pretty much every single deck I can, it's because of this deck. Because even though, yes, you do have like singular lines of Digimon, you do also just hard play these rookies and champions whenever you're given the chance because of the powerful tamer effects you have, and because these guys are being hard played, they're not being evolved, so the more bodies you have, the better, and because they have save, you don't care if they go to the trash. And then finally, this deck being red and yellow has access to some of the most broken and powerful option cards ever created, like Sunrise Buster and Crimson Blaze. On top of that, having things like Fireball and Gravity Crush to help increase your overall resources, because this is still a combo deck. You need to draw a lot of cards and be able to play a lot of cards. Memory and extra cards in hand is always nice. And even though this deck is super fast, super resourceful, I actually don't think it's that well positioned in the English version of the Digimon TCG Set 10 format, simply because we're not playing best of 1, we're playing best of 3. This deck at its core is a combo deck, and so when you really pop off, it feels unbeatable. But on games where you have to like figure out ways to gain little bits of advantage and play around what your opponent's doing, it can kind of stumble sometimes because it's really good at doing one thing or a couple of things. Reacting to the specific things your opponent is doing to try to counter you can seem difficult sometimes. So I feel like people who just like glob onto this deck because they think it's the best will struggle to find wins. However, because it is so strong, those people that take the time to learn the matchups and learn the spread will see success because it is just that powerful, and it has options available to it to deal with any bad matchups it may have. I think the worst one one right now is probably Minervamon and maybe some kind of scary Jesmon board that includes Genkumon, Solarmon, and the starter deck Sistermon Blanc. Otherwise, this deck is really powerful, and I cannot wait to play with it and dread playing against it. And boom, there you guys go. That is it for all of my decks in the current BT10 format. I cannot wait to start using these decks and tweaking them as the format evolves. Let me know what y'all think of them and what changes you would make down below in the comments. And with all that being said, I've been your true champion, Steven. Be sure to leave a like and subscribe. Peace.